Volume 3, Chapter 10. Oh, the joy of young ideas painted on the mind! In the warm glowing colors fancy spreads on objects not yet known, when all is new and all is lovely. Sacred dramas. We now return to Languedoc and to the mansion of Count de Villefort, the nobleman who succeeded to an estate of the Marquis de Villefort, situated near the monastery of Saint Clare. It may be recollected that this chateau was uninhabited when Saint Aubert and his daughter were in the neighborhood, and that the former was much affected on discovering himself to be so far Chateau Le Blanc, a place concerning which the good old La Dessin afterwards dropped some hints that had alarmed Emily's curiosity. It was in the year 1584, the beginning of that in which Saint Aubert died. The Franchise Beauvoir, Count de Villefort, came into possession on the mansion, an extensive domain called Chateau Le Blanc, situated in the province of Languedoc, on the shore of the Mediterranean. This state, which during some centuries had belonged to his family, now descended to him on the decease of his relative, the Marquis de Villefort, who had been latterly a man of reserved manner and austere character. Circumstances which, together with the duties of his profession, that often called him into the field, had prevented any degree of intimacy with his cousin, the Count de Villefort. For many years they had known little of each other, and the Count received the first intelligence of his death, which happened in the distant part of France, together with the instruments that gave him possession of the domain Chateau Le Blanc. But it was not till the following year that he determined to visit that state, when he designed to pass the autumn there. The scenes of Chateau Le Blanc often came to his remembrance, highlighted by the touches which a warm imagination gives to the recollection of the early pleasure. For many years before, in the lifetime of Marchioness, and at that age when the mind is particularly sensible to impression of Italy and delight, he had once visited this spot, and though he had passed a long intervening period amidst the vexation and tumults of public affairs, which too frequently corrode the heart and vitiate the taste, the shade of Languedoc, and the grandeur of its distant scenery had never been remembered by him with indifference. During many years, the chateau had been abandoned by the late Marquis, and being inhabited only by an old steward and his wife, had been suffered to fall much into decay. To superintend the repair that would be requisite to make it a comfortable residence had been a principal motive with all count for passing the autumnal month in Languedoc, and neither the remonstrances or the tears of the Countess, for on urgent occasions she could weep, were powerful enough to overcome his determination. She prepared, therefore, to obey the command which she could not conquer, and to resign the gay assemblies of Paris, where her beauty of generally unrivalled and won the applause to which her wit and but had put feeble claim. For the twilight canopy of wood, the lonely grandeur of mountains, and the solemnity of Gothic halls, and of long, long galleries which echoed only the solitary step of a domestic, or the measured clink that ascended from the great clock, the ancient monitor of the hall below. From these melancholy expectations she endured to relieve her spirits by recollecting all that she had ever heard concerning the joyous vintage of the pains of Languedoc. But there, alas, no airy forms would bound to the gay melody of Parisian dance, and a view of the rustic festivities of peasants could afford little pleasure to the heart, in which even the feelings of ordinary benevolence had long since decayed under the corruption of luxury. The Count had a son and a daughter, the children of a former marriage, who he designed should accompany him to the south of France. Harry, who had in his 20th year was in the French service, and Belange, who was not yet 18, had been hereditary confined to the convent where she had been placed immediately on her father's second marriage. The present countess, who had neither sufficient ability or inclination to superintend the education of her daughter-in-law, had advised this step, and the dread of superior beauty had since urged her to employ every art that might prevail to the Count to prolong the period of Blanc's seclusion. It was, therefore, with extreme mortification that she now understood he would no longer submit on this subject Yet it afforded her some consolation to consider that though the Lady Blank would emerge from her convent, the shades of the country would for some time veil her beauty from the public eye. On the morning which commenced the journey, the postilion stopped at the convent by the Count's order to take a blank whose heart beat with delight at the prospect of novelty and freedom now before her. As the time of her departure drew nigh, her impatience had increased, and the last night during which she counted every note of every hour had appeared the most tedious of any she had ever known. The morning light at length dawned, the matin bell rang. She heard the nuns' light descending from their chamber, and she started from a sleepless pillow to welcome the day which was to emancipate her from the severities of a cloister and introduce her to the world, where pleasure was ever smiling and goodness ever blessed, where in short nothing but pleasure and goodness reigned. When the bell of the great gate rang, and the sound was followed by that of carriage wheel, she ran with a palpitating heart to her lattice, and perceiving her father's carriage in the court below, danced with airy steps along the gallery, where she was met by a nun with her Simons from the abbess. In the next moment she was in the parlour, and in the presence of the Countess, who now appeared to her as an angel that was to lead her into happiness. But the emotions of the Countess on beholding her were not in unison with those of Belench, who had never appeared so lovely as at this moment, when her countenance, animated by the lightning smile of joy, glowed with the beauty of happy innocence. After conversing for a few minutes with the abbess, the Countess rose to go. This was the moment which Belling had anticipated with such eager expectation, the summit from which she looked down upon the fairy land of happiness and served all its enchantment. Was it a moment then for tears of regret? Yet it was so. She returned with an altered and dejected countenance to her young companions who were come to bid her farewell and wept. Even my lady abbess, so stately and so solemn, she saluted with a degree of sorrow which an honor, which an hour before she would have believed it impossible to feel, and which may be accounted for by considering how reluctant we all part, even with unpleasing object. When the separation is consciously forever. Again she kissed the poor nun, and then followed the countess from the spot with tears, which she expected to leave only with smiles. But the presence of her father and the variety of objects on the road soon engaged her attention and dissipated the shade which tender regret had thrown upon her spirits. Inattentive to the conversation which was passing between the Countess and Mademoiselle Bearn, her friend, Beleng sat, lost in pleasing reverie, as she watched the clouds floating silently along the blue expanse, now veiling the sun and stretching their shadow along the distant scene, and then disclosing all his brightness. The journey continued to give Beleng inexpressible delight, for new scenes of nature were every instant opening to her view, and her fancy became stored with gay and beauty imagery. It was on the evening of seventh day that the travellers came within view of Chateau Blanc. The romantic beauty of those situations strongly impressed the imagination of Beleng, who observed with sublime astonishment the Pyrenean mountain which had been seen only at the distance during the day, now rising within a few leagues, with their wild cliffs and immense precipices, which the evening clouds floating round them now disclosed and again veiled. The setting rays that tinged their snowy summits with a roseate hue, touched their lower point with various coloring, while bluish tint that prevailed their shadowy recesses gave the strength of contrast to the splendor of light. The plains of Languedoc bursting with the purple wine and Divorcelle with cloves of mulberry among and olives spread far to the north and the east. To the south appeared to the Mediterranean, clear as crystal and blue as the heavens. It reflected, bearing on its bosom vessels whose white sail caught the sunbeams and gave animation to the scene. On the high promontory, washed by the water of the Mediterranean, stood her father's mansion, almost secluded from the eye by wood of intermingled pine, oak, and chestnut, which crowded the eminence and sloped toward the plains on one side, while on the other they extended to the considerable distance along the seashores. As Belench drew nearer, the Gothic features of this Antonine mansion successively appeared. First, an embattled turret rising above the trees, then the broken arch of an immense gateway retiring beyond them, and she almost fancied herself approaching a castle, such as is often celebrated in early story, where the knights look out from the battlements on some champion below, who, clothed in black armor, comes with his campaign to rescue the fair lady of his love from the oppression of his revival. A sort of legends to which she had once or twice obtained access in the library of her convent, that, like many others belonging to the monk, was stored with these reliques of romantic fiction. The carriages stopped at the gate, which led into the domain of the chateau, but which was now fastened, and the great bell that had formerly served to announce the arrival of strangers, having long since fallen from its station. A servant climbed over a ruined part of the adjoining wall to give notice to those within the arrival of their lord. As Belench leaned from the couch down, she resigned herself to the sweet and gentle emotions which the hour and the scenery awakened. The sun had now left the earth, and twilight began to darken the mountains, while the distant waters, reflecting the bluffs that still glowed in the west, appeared like a line of light skirting the horizon. The low murmur of waves breaking on the shores came in the breeze, and now and then the melancholy dashing of oars was feebly heard from a distance. She was suffered to indulge her pensive mood, for the thoughts to the rest of the party were silently engaged upon the subject of their several interests. Meanwhile, the Countess, reflecting with regret upon the gay parties which had left at Paris, surveyed with disgust what she thought the gloomy woods and solitary wildness of the scenes, and shrinking from the prospect of being shut up in an old castle, was prepared to meet every object with displeasure. The feelings of Henry were somewhat similar to those of the Countess. He gave a mournful sigh to the delights of the capital and the remembrance of a lady who he believed had engaged his affections and who had certainly fascinated his imagination. But the surroundings, country, and the mood of life on which he has entering had for him at least the charm of novelty, and his regret was softened by the gay expectations of youth. The gates being at length unbarred, the carriage moved slowly on, under spreading chestnut, the almost excluding the remain of day, following what had been formerly a road, but which now, overgrown with luxuriant vegetation, could be traced only by the boundary formed by trees on either side, and which wound for near half a mile along the woods before it reached the chateau. This was the very avenue that Saint Albert and Emily had formerly entered on the first arrival of the neighborhood, with the hope of finding a house that would receive them for the night, and had so abruptly quitted on perceiving the wildness of the place, and the figure which they possibly had fancied was a robber. "What a dismal place is this!" exclaimed by Countess, as the carriage penetrated the deeper recesses of the wood. "Surely, my lord, you do not mean to pass all the autumn in this barbarous spot? Were not to bring hither a cup of a water of lead, that the remembrance of pleasanter scenes may not heighten at least the natural dearness of these." "I shall be governed by circumstances, madam," said the Count. "This barbarous spot was inhabited by my ancestors." The carriage now stopped at the chateau, where at the door of the great hall appeared the old steward and the Persian servant who had been sent to prepare the chateau, waiting to receive the lord. Lady Bengough now perceived that the edifice was not built entirely in the Gothic style, but that it had additions of more modern date. The large and gloomy hall, however, into which she now entered, was entirely Gothic, and sumptuous tapestry, which it was now too dark to distinguish, hung upon the walls and depictured scenes from some of the antecedent Provencal romances. A vast Gothic window embroidered with climatics and eglantine that ascended to the south laid the eye. Now that the casement were thrown open, through this verdant shade over a sloping lawn to the tops of dark wood that hung upon the brow of the promontory. Beyond appeared the waters of Mediterranean, stretching far to the south and the east, where they were lost in the horizon, while to the northeast they were bounded by the luxuriant shores of Languedoc and Provence, enriched with wood and gay with vines, sloping pastures, and to the southwest by the majestic Myronese, now fading from the eye beneath the gradual gloom. Belinge, as she crossed the hall, stopped a moment to observe this lovely prospect, which the evening twilight obscured, yet did not conceal. But she was quickly awakened from the complacent delight which the scene had diffused upon her mind by the Countess, who discounted with every object around and impatient for refreshment and repose, hastened forward to the large parlour, whose cedar wainscot, narrow pointed casement, and dark ceiling of carved cypress wood gave it an aspect of peculiar gloom, which the dingy green velvet of the chairs and couches, fringed with traced gold, had once been designed to enliven, while the Countess inquired for refreshment. The Count, attended by his son, went to look over some part of chateau. The Lady Blanche reluctantly remained to witness the discontent and ill humour of her stepmother. "How long have you lived in this desolate place?" said her ladyship to old housekeeper, who came to pay her duty. "Of 20 years, your ladyship, on the next feast of Saint Jerome." "How happened it that you have lived here so long, and almost alone too? I understood that the chateau had been shut up for some years." "Yes, madam. It was for many years after my late lord the Count went to the wars. but it is above 20 years since I and my husband came into his service. The place is so large and has of late been so lonely that we were lost in it, and after some time we went to live in a cottage at the end of the woods near some of the tenants, and came to look after the chateau every now and then. When my lord returned to France from the wars, he took a dislike to the place and never came to live here again. And so he was satisfied with our remaining at the cottage. Alas, alas, how the chateau is changed from what it once was. What delight my late lady used to take in it. I well remember when she came here a bride, and how fine it was. Now it has been neglected so long and is gone into such decay. I shall never see those days again. The Countess appearing to the somewhat offended by the toughness, thoughtless simplicity with which the old woman regretted former times, Dorothy added, but the chateau will now be inhabited and cheerful again. Not all the world could tempt me to leave it in it alone. Well, the experiment will not be made. I believe, said the Countess, displeased that her own silence had been unable to awe the lucidity of this rustic old housekeeper, now spared from further attendance by entrance of the Count, who said he had been viewing part of chateau and found that it would require considerable repairs and some alternation before it would be perfectly comfortable as a place of residence. I am sorry to hear it, my lord, replied by Countess. And why sorry, madam? Because the place will ill repay your trouble, and were it even a paradise, it would be insufferable at such a distance from Paris. A count made no reply, but walked abruptly to the window. There are windows, my lord, but they neither admit entertainment or light. They show only a scene of savage nature. I am at a loss, madam, said the Count, to conjecture what you mean by savage nature. Do those plains or those woods or that fine expanse of water deserve the name? Those mountains certainly do, my lord, rejoined the Countess, pointing to the Pyrenees, and this chateau, though not a work of rude nature is, to my taste at least, on one of savage art. The Count coloured highly. This place, madam, was the work of my ancestors, said he, and you must allow me to say that your present conversation discovers neither good taste or good manner. Belange, now shocked at an altercation which appeared to be increasing to a serious disagreement, rose to leave the room when her mother's woman entered it, and the Countess, immediately desiring to be shewed to her own apartment, withdraw, attended by Maid Mousley, Baron. Lady Blank, it being not yet dark, took this opportunity of exploring new scenes, and leaving the parlour, she passed from the hall into a wide gallery, whose walls were decorated by marble pilasters, which supported an arched roof, composed of a rich mosaic work. Through a distant window that seemed to terminate the gallery were seen the purple clouds of evening, and the landscape, whose features, thinly veiled in twilight, no longer appeared distinctly, but blended into one grand mass, stretched to horizon, coloured only with a tint of Solomon grey. This enthusiastic solitude was interrupted by a rustling noise in the hall, and while the loneliness of the place made her sensible to fear, she thought she perceived something moving between the pillars. For a moment she continued silently observing it, till, ashamed of her ridiculous apprehension, she recollected courage enough to demand who was there. "Oh, my young lady, is it you?" said the old housekeeper, who was come to shut the windows. "I am glad it is you." The manner in which she spoke this, with a faint breath, rather surprised Belange, who said, "You seemed frightened, Dorothy. What is the matter?" "No, not frightened, Mamselle," replied Dorothy, hesitating and trying to appear composed, "but I am old, and a little matter startles me." The Lady Belange smiled at the distinction. "I am glad that my lord the Count is come to live at the chateau, ma'am," Sally continued Dorothy, "for it has been many years deserted to dearly enough. Now the place will look like little as it liked to do when my poor lady was alive." Belange inquired how long it was since the Marchioness died. "Alas, my lady," replied Dorothy, "so long that I have ceased to count the years. The place, to my mind, has mourned ever since, and I am sure my lord's vessels have. But you have lost yourself, ma'am, sir. See, I saw you could the other side of the chateau. Beleng inquired how long this part of the edifice had been built. Soon after my lord's marriage, ma'am, replied Dorothy. The place was large enough without this addition, for many rooms of the old building were even then never made use of, and my lord had a princely household too. But he thought the ancient mansion gloomy, and gloomy enough it is. Lady Melange now desired to be shown to the inhabited part of the chateau, and as the passage were entirely dark, Dorothy conducted her along the edges of the lawn to the opposite side of the edifice, where an open door into the great hall. She was met by Mademoiselle Burn. "Where have you been so long?" said she. "I had begun to think some wonderful adventure had befallen you, and that the giant of this enchanted castle, or the ghost which no doubt haunted it, had conveyed you through a trap door into some subterranean vault, whence you was never to return." "No," replies Belange, laughingly. "You seem to love adventures so well. I leave them for you to achieve. Well, I am willing to achieve them, provided I am allowed to describe them." "My dear Mademoiselle Byrne," said Henry, as he met her at the door of the parlour, "no ghost of these days would be so savage as to impose silence on you. Our ghosts are more civilized than to condemn a lady to a purgatory survivor ever, even then their own be it what it may. Did these scenes, sir," said Belange, "ever appeared more lovely than they do now?" "To me this seems hardly possible." The Count, regarding her with a melancholy smile, said, "They once were as delightful to me as they are now to you. The landscape is not changed, but time has changed me. From my mind the illusion which gave spirit to the colouring of nature is fading fast. If you leave my dear Melange to revisit this spot at distance the many years, you will perhaps remember and understand the feelings of your father." The furniture also was of ancient date. The bed was of blue damask, trimmed with tarnished gold lace, and its lofty tester rose in the form of canopy whereas the curtains descended like those of such tents as are sometimes represented in old pictures, and indeed much resembling those inhabited on the faded tapestry with which the chamber was hung. The Belange, every object here was matter of curiosity, and taking the light from her woman to examine the tapestry, she perceived that is represented scenes from the War of Troy, though the almost colourless worsted now mocked the glowing accent they once had painted. She laughed at the Lacurit's absurdity, she observed, till recollecting that the hands which had wove it were like the poet whose thoughts of fire they had attempted to express, long since mouldered into dust. A train of melancholy ideas passed over her mind, and she almost wept. Having given her woman a strict injunction to awaken her before sunrise, she dismissed her, and then, to dissipate the gloom which reflection had cast upon her spirits, opened one of the high casements and was again cheered by the face of living nature. The shadowy earth, the air, and ocean, all was still. Along the deep side of the heavens, a few light clouds floated slowly through those skirts of stars now seemed to tremble and now to emerge with purer splendor. Belange's thoughts arose involuntarily to the great author of the sublime object she contemplated, and she breathed a prayer of finer devotion than any she had ever uttered beneath the vaulted roof of the cloister. At the casement she remained till the glooms of midnight were stretched over the prospect. She then retired to her pillow, and with gay visions of tomorrow, to those sweet slumbers which health and happy innocence only know. To-morrow to fresh woods and pastures new.